I am now honored to introduce to you three distinguished and deeply spiritual gentlemen who have helped shape an important and necessary conversation in the 20th century and now in the 21st century. It is, after all is said and done, about the significance of an interfaith dialogue. A Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, together. And together they believe that we are at our best We are deeply grateful to have Rabbi Leonard Bierman with us today, the founding rabbi of the Leo Beck Temple in West Los Angeles, where he served for 37 years. Long active on issues of peace and social justice, he has co-chaired many committees related to the issues of the day. And with the Reverend George Regas, co-founded the Interfaith Center to Reverse the Arms Race. We are also happy to have with us today the Reverend Dr. George Regas, who retired as the rector of All Saints Church in Pasadena after having served there for 20 years. While at All Saints, he was deeply engaged with the issues of peace and justice as he led his congregation to oppose the Vietnam War, the escalating arms race, and the Gulf War. He is now Rector Emeritus. And lastly, on the end, Dr. Maher Atut, who is a leading spokesperson for the American Muslim community. He is a retired physician best known for his tireless and unending commitment to public service. Dr. Hatut has traveled extensively and written extensively on issues related to Islam, human rights, democracy, Middle East politics. We are honored to have all three of these men. 40 years of friendship, a commitment to social justice, and a deep and abiding dialogue which we are being invited to participate in this morning. We welcome you all to this time and place. Welcome.
So the first question I'd love to ask, and these people will be impromptu speakers, is Hamilton. Hamilton, can you take the mic and read your question in a loud voice?
Do you believe that your religion is right? And if you do, wouldn't you want other people to believe in your religion also?
This question is to whom?
To all of you.
Oh.
Any or all.
So they will answer. I do believe that my religion is right. But I do believe that everybody else have the right to reach a different conclusion and to choose another religion. So this does not take away from my conviction that my religion is right. But definitely the rabbi make a different choice. He has my full respect and love, and his choice is valid. So is the reverend, and so is everybody. One thing about religion, it cannot be faked and it cannot be imposed. Otherwise, you are submitting to the imposing power, not to God Almighty. So religion has to be from your heart and your mind, and your heart and your mind will tell you something very interesting, can be observed easily, that God wanted people to have different religions. Otherwise, he could have zapped them in one religion, which he didn't know throughout the history. So
I think that the position of saying my religion is best, you need to become a Christian, that claim of superiority has been one of the most divisive, destructive concepts since the beginning of religion. And so the idea that I want you to be a Christian, or Leonard wants you to be a Jew, or Maher a Muslim, it's that concept that we have tried hard to combat, to praise and respect and love the religion of the brother, while at the same time rooting myself down in my Christian belief of a lifetime. Does that make sense to you?
Just a footnote from me. Listening to my friends, Maher and George, answer the question very much in the way I would. I believe that my religion is right for me.
Alex.
What would you say is one event that has occurred in your life that brought you all together despite religion? Despite religion? It can have to do with religion or not. I know.
Brought you together in your life. One event that brought you together in your lives, whether that's religiously related or not.
Well, the thing that brought Leonard and me together was that we were to speak at a peace rally in Los Angeles, a rally against the Vietnam War, and it was the most radical experience I'd ever had. I mean, they were so angry about the U.S. being in Iraq.
In Vietnam.
In Vietnam, that's right, Vietnam, 67. And there were two Navy officers dressed in their Navy uniforms, and they were carrying a casket, a fake casket, draped in a Viet Cong flag throughout the area. And they were burning draft cards. It was the most radical experience. And I was to be a speaker, and Leonard was to be a speaker.
I think we sensed from our first meeting with one another individually that this was a person of integrity. This was a person whom we could trust. This was a human being who had an essential humaneness about him. And therefore, this was someone I wanted to be close to. It wasn't a matter of religious belief that animated me to want to be connected to Maher and George. It was a feeling of at oneness with someone else. I'm sure you've had that kind of experience in meeting.
they call it misery loves company.
Whatever, what emerged from that is this enduring friendship and respect and unity as we seek to translate the ideals of our respective religious faiths into action in addressing the great problems that face our country and the world today.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Robert.
Hi, Robert.
All right, so you kind of talked about it in your guys' speeches, but I have a question. Historically speaking, religion is in part supposed to be about peace and unification. Why then has there been and still is such division and conflict in the world in the name of religion? In essence, what do you see as religion's role or responsibility for this conflict and division in the world?
That's a wonderful question. We could spend the whole day today and tomorrow just begin. I think that so much of the conflict and animosity and evil, war, that have come out of religion is based on many factors, but predominantly based on the sense of exclusion, based on a sense that we are the chosen ones. And I think that exceptionalism is a very divisive, evil force, and that when a group of Jews feel that they are the chosen ones, or a group of Christians feel that this world belongs to them, etc., that leads to the greatest pain and suffering that the world has ever known. I mean, we don't have the Crusades that once soaked the world in blood, but we have so many religious people who feel that my faith is the faith, that my way of looking at God is the superior way. And that exclusivity is a very demonic element in the world, and certainly within the world of religion.
I agree with the statements. However, I wanted to put few points for you to think about. Because the notion is religion is causing trouble, let us do without religion. You are studying European history, and you know that the oceans of blood were shed by no religion, whether it is on the hands of Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin, or the hands of Adolf Hitler, the First World War, the Second World War, bombing Hiroshima. All of these are, quote, secularist activities that have nothing to do with religion, and the religion did not play a role. If anything, we have, I think, the Bishop of Germany, or the head of the Catholic Church in Germany, saluting Adolf Hitler. So they were very subsidiary, just used to give a blessing to the atrocities, but the atrocities themselves were committed by people who don't give a hoof about religion.
At what point does devotion become extremism?
The question is...
My younger friend is the one.
The baby brother. Devotion does not become extremism unless it leads to extremist behavior or extremist mentality, which means that I am devoted to that. Everybody else should. And if they don't, they are bad and I am good. This is the extremist mentality. If it is translated into behavior, it will be aggression. And it can be repression, and it can be terrorism, and etc. All the elements of compulsion, that I have the right to compel people to see the light. And this is probably the bedrock of lots of problems. But if I say I'm devoted 50%, and I am through reading and through thinking and became devoted to my cause 100%, this in itself per se is not bad or is not dangerous. But if it comes with it, it harbors into it that the other is not as good because I am more devoted and more intelligent and can see it clearer while those other dummies cannot. And so I'll show it to them. That's dangerous. And this should be the line that you are talking about. This is the line that ought not to be crossed.
Fear is what leads to extremism. Mm-hmm. Fear is the thing that divides people, that takes away trust, and makes it possible for people to turn to those who appear to have powerful and certain answers to questions. Fear is one of the great dangers that we have even in the United States today, because it prompts us sometimes to ignore and bypass some of the basic constitutional principles which have guaranteed the freedom of all of us as Americans. We've seen that happen in our response to the terrible event of September 11th, 2001, where our country turned to forms of behavior that violated the norms of the Constitution itself. Secret renditions, imprisonment without charges,
torture.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the open acknowledgement of the use of torture, mm-hmm. And attempt to justify it. So none of those responsible for the torture have ever themselves been brought to justice.
So, do you believe that any of the other two gentlemen will be denied salvation based on his religious beliefs?
Those two? I have a problem with the premises itself, that who would dare to give himself or herself the right to speak the mind of God and say, Mar Hathout is doomed, Leonard Berman will be in paradise, and Regas will be somewhere in between. We don't have it really takes lots of callousness and audacity to make the judgment. Because who am I? Who is anybody? What do I know about other people? I don't know what made him a Jew, what made him a Christian, what made him a Muslim. We don't know what factors. You came out with a fancy word yesterday, cognition or something like that. A good English word, anyways. We'll try to look at it. What factors played together to make us who we are? The only one who have this comprehensive, absolute, complete knowledge is God Almighty. And He is the only one who can make judgment. And He is the only one who promised justice, mercy, and grace. And we all seek to reach that rather than judging each other. I think once we start judging each other, particularly in that domain of the afterlife, we are sinners by just doing that.
I think one of the great weaknesses of the Christian faith, as it's practiced by many people, is its exclusive claims that the way of Jesus is the only way into a saving place with God here and in eternity. I mean, that is at the heart of so much conflict and suffering over the ages. So I am a deeply committed Christian, and I want to follow Jesus. But that to exclusively say that's the only way is incorrect. It is intolerant, and it is injurious to the human family.
Among our ancient traditions, the phrase "the world to come" is used somewhat vaguely to refer to the ultimate reward, which would be life after death. And we have a teaching in one of our sacred books which says, "The righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come." So that the essential righteousness of human beings becomes the ultimate arbiter of who is to receive the ultimate reward, not the one who has proper belief, not the one who's necessarily a Jew in our tradition. But I must say, as a little boy, I remember driving with my father in the summer. My father was a traveling salesman. And in those days, all the highways were two-car highways. Speed limit was 40 miles an hour. And there were signs along the road advertising a shaving cream called Barbasol. And Barbasol had these signs everywhere along the way. But if you ever came to a bridge overhanging, almost always in our part, I lived the earliest part of my boyhood in Pennsylvania, there was the sign, "Believe on me and ye shall be saved." Believe on me and ye shall be saved, which was obviously a reference to belief in Jesus, and you would be saved. And I, as a little boy, I would shiver a little bit when I passed this sign, because I felt that was excluding little Jewish boys like me. Obviously, it was more than that. It was an affirmation of faith, a desire to advertise it to the world, and one way of doing it.
I'm going to ask a very concrete political question. What is the realistic future for Israel and the Palestinians, and what is the U.S. role in that? You might want to start. Who'd like to start with that?
Nobody likes to start on that.
Thank you. Rabbi?
This is a question to which I've dedicated myself since the year 1947, when I went to Jerusalem ostensibly to do graduate work at the Hebrew University and became caught up in the beginnings of a conflict that followed the United Nations decision in November of 1947 that Palestine should be partitioned into two separate and independent states, one Jewish and one Arab. And the Jews of Palestine at the time accepted with great joy that decision, and the Arabs rejected it. because they felt that they were being stripped of their rights to lands that were properly theirs. And furthermore, the decision itself provided that the Jewish section of what was Palestine would be somewhat larger than that accorded to the Palestinians. I felt that the acceptance of the UN decision by the Jews of Palestine, who subsequently declared themselves to be the State of Israel some 5 or 6 months later, was entering a contract, accepting that this land was meant to be shared between two people, and that that contract is abiding. Israel has resisted over the years accepting the full implications of that contract by the building of settlements in the territories that had been allotted for a future Palestinian state, by ruling over the Palestinians who lived in the West Bank and Gaza and not giving them the privilege of their freedom. And the Palestinians, by their own history of rejectionism, not only the Palestinians, but nations of the Arab world as well, continued, it appeared, to refuse to accept the contract. Now, over the years, great changes have taken place. And you should know that Jewish opinion about this matter is sharply divided. But I am among those who believe that only when Israelis and Palestinians recognize the common humanity of each, recognize that each of them has a right to live in this land, once a single land called Palestine, can there be peace and true security. Security cannot come from the building of separation walls. Security cannot come with an ever accumulation of weapons of destruction. Security cannot come from suicide bombing. Security can only come from the recognition that ultimately these two peoples deserve the security that comes from recognizing each the essential humanity. Whether it will come, because the decisions now are being affected by political considerations within all of the countries involved, not the least of which is political decisions that have to do with the United States itself, which complicates the issue all the more. And in the process, the true needs of suffering people, people yearning to be free, I'm thinking of the Palestinian people, are being ignored and rejected. I don't know whether there can be peace. I'm praying for it and wishing for it and doing my own little part to try to bring it about.
Hello, I'm Olivia, and my question is, how would you explain God's sovereignty versus free will? Like, what's your response to if people ask you, well, how would you serve a God, or why would you serve a God who allows such destruction to come over this land? Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Okay, give her a great answer.
Well, that issue has been one of the central theological disputes and debates through the centuries, and it's a very important question, and I think one has to deal with that paradoxically, that in that I, as a human being, have been given the freedom to become all God has created me to be. I am a free person on this journey. And that journey produces some good things and some destructive things. And it's within God's world that I am on that journey. God's sovereignty, in my opinion, is not one that interferes with that journey. I think that God is involved in that journey and has a sovereignty over it, but God has chosen to limit God's self to how the human race responds. And I do not think God intervenes in that journey in a massive way. The paradox for me is, and yet God does come into that life. I think that I have experienced myself and seen remarkable things happen to people who feel that they want to give their lives over to God and let God take over and be supreme in their lives. I've seen remarkable things happen. But the idea that God, being the creator and the sovereign, will interfere in the human enterprise is something that I can't accept.
It's the question on which all the religions have foundered. The first great effort to deal with that question in my religious tradition, the Jewish tradition, is the book of Job in the Bible, where Job is portrayed as a thoroughly righteous person in every way, and he's been given all kinds of gifts of wealth, prosperity, family, everything. And Satan comes and, in effect, challenges God and says, the only reason Job is such a good guy is because you've endowed him with so many blessings. You take those away from him and you'll see that he's not going to be the faithful person that he appears to be. So, in this imaginative tale, God agrees. Take everything away from him. Don't take his life. And so, instantly, you probably know all of this and don't need me to tell you, Job is stripped of everything. His children die. All of his property and holdings and cattle and everything is in effect destroyed, and he's left with his wife. A dubious privilege, but he... and he can't believe it. And ultimately, he insists. His friends come and say, if you'd only admit that you've done something wrong, everybody does something wrong. If you'd only admit you've done something, God is very forgiving. He will forgive you. But Job said, no, I have done nothing wrong. And he refuses. And the answer is not given. There really is no answer to your question in the Bible. The final answer, except that God is so great and God is so awesome. Maybe the only place the word awesome should properly be used and not as we use it. I don't want to get into that. At any event, that how can human beings even raise such a question? I've struggled with that question all my life, and still am. And all I know is that God has given me this life into which I can become whatever I can be.
Is that okay? It's even better. I'm a pro.
He's what?
The same thing, we have this roof. Anything happens here is under this roof. But under this roof, we can be punching each other in the nose. We can be saluting each other. We can have an intelligent discussion. And we can have a very stupid altercation if we want. So it is up to us. Nonetheless, the roof is there. And the roof here is the will of God. Nothing escapes the will of God. Nonetheless, we have that space of freedom. Medieval scholars of Islam said, you are free to do in what you can. You have to accept what you cannot. And at that time, I wondered what kind of statement is this, because they didn't tell me which is which. Until I studied medicine, really, and I discovered that our being itself is, you are studying biology? Anybody? It's also against your religion. We have what we call the somatic or systemic nervous system that tells me, pull your hand, push your hand, walk, and these are very complex actions. Like it has to be coordinated. Just to pull my hand like this means a group of muscles will get a signal to relax, and a group of muscles will get a signal to contract at the same time and at the same harmony. With this nervous system, with this part of nervous system that makes me do things that I decide to do, there is another, what we call the autonomic nervous system, which, thanks God, is out of our control. This is how I breathe, how I digest the food, how my heart beats, how I sleep. So good component of us is done by this other nervous system. So the combination of free will and dictated will, if you will, are in our body itself. So no wonder that it is in life at large.
Hello, my name is Chanelli Jane, and my question is, like going off your violence point, even though religion has such a feeling of comfort and power behind it, how come it's a reoccurring theme and like the central point of conflict and violence? And will this violence ever have like a resolution to it, or will it ever stop?
I didn't hear.
So the point is, the point of your question is, would you repeat it? Okay. Not the whole question, but...
Oh, this is great. This is good. This is thesis development.
Yes.
The juice of your question.
Oh, like why is religion the basis of conflict and violence in our society, and how will it ever stop if it can?
Yeah, it will stop if we really hold dearly to very basic concepts that doesn't need a genius to know that God is very powerful and very merciful, the way we claim it. And so God wanted people to be of different religions. In the Quran, and I'm sure equivalently in the other books, there are statements that haven't been the will of God to make all of you the same. He would have done it, but his will is diversity. So we have to believe that, and the history is telling us, that people meant to be of different religions, of different ways of thinking, and of different convictions, because our DNA is different. Just imagine each one of us is so unique and irreplaceable because everyone is individual that cannot be replaced or matched. So if this is so, we have to accept this as a reality of life. And if we are smart, we try to live the life happily by cooperating on what we believe is good. We don't have to cooperate on everything, and we don't have to believe in everything the other believes in, but we can really find a very solid and capacious common ground that will allow us to work together for a better life. The second thing is that God does not belong to any religion, but all religions belong to God. In none of the scriptures, the deity said, I am a Jew, or I am a Christian, or I am a Muslim. There is nothing like that. We acted as if he's my God. That leads to the third point. Nobody, no power can own God. He's not my God. I am his subject. This is the other way around. I should make my God because it will be a God that I made, not the God that actually made me. Those are very basic things in any religion, I am afraid, are not taught. They are not taught enough in Sunday schools. They are not taught enough in biblical studies or in Quranic studies. While they are, like you are studying math and you are overlooking adding and subtracting, and you use just your calculator. I'm sure that all of you do that. Until it seems to me that we forgot that it is 4 because 2 plus 2 equals 4. But I punch the calculator, it will give me an answer, and I am happy like that. If I manipulate your calculator a little bit, you will flunk any math test you go to, because I relegated my thinking to the machine, or to the chief, or to the priest, or to the rabbi, or to the imam.
I think that the only way to victory is for religion, all religion, will stop blessing war and violence. There is a sense that the divine is somehow there to bless conflict and war. I mean, President Bush, when he led us into war with Afghanistan and Iraq, said that God was there with us. God had told him to go into that war. And I think that we have lived throughout history with the religious people, the religious side of life, seeing where they want to go and finding this divine reality, blessing that. And if across the world the theme could be established that religious communities cannot bless war and violence, that's my hope. And that's the only way I see us into a world where war no longer has such a paramount grip on political leaders and citizens.
I'd like to add to George just an addendum, and you take that stand when the people who are launching war are your own people. We should, if the Jews are launching a war, it is the rabbi who will say that this is wrong. And when Muslims are launching a war, it is the Muslim person who say this is wrong, and so on and so forth. Because religion cannot be based on anything but integrity. There is no religion without integrity. And the integrity shows not when you stand against others, it is when you stand against your own. From your own self, to your own people, to your own tribe, to your own gang, if you will.
I think it's important to remember, and it's something to which Dr. Hatut referred earlier in the day, maybe you weren't here. You know, the greatest force for violence in the world is not religion. The greatest force for violence in the world is the nation state. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. And none of those wars of the 20th century were religious wars or had anything to do with religion. And so too, the wars in which we're now engaged, where daily people are being killed, people are fleeing into exile, children are dying as we meet, not because of religion, but because of the power of the nation state and its insistence on using power as an expression of its foreign policy. So in a sense, there's the militarization of all of our minds. All of us are subjected to that in our thinking, rather than seeing peace, accommodation, understanding, recognition of the humanity of the other as what should lie at the essence of our approach to conflict. So I'm not in any way trying to apologize or explain away the violence that has indeed historically come out of religious conflict. But it is puny compared to the violence that has been perpetrated in my lifetime. And none of that violence had anything whatsoever to do with religious teaching. It was often the absence of religious teaching, the absence of the teachings of Islam, the absence of the teaching of Jesus and Christianity, the absence of the teachings that came out of my Jewish tradition that allowed people to perpetrate these horrors on one another.
My students know that my main topic is the good life, and I know that I am inspired to have, for the past 2 days, been with 3 gentlemen who embody lives being extremely well lived. Please join me one final time in thanking our 3 guests.